Morning light streamed through the window of a luxurious Manhattan apartment, illuminating the expensive furnishings. Richard Montgomery, a 55-year-old man with gray-streaked hair and deep contemplative eyes, stared at his reflection in the mirror. A successful billionaire, yet his gaze was filled with uncertainty. Richard had reached the pinnacle of success with his tech company, but something still felt profoundly lacking in his heart. The extravagant parties, powerful connections, and enormous bank accounts suddenly seemed meaningless. A new segment about the harsh realities faced by New York's homeless appeared on his television. Captivated, he listened carefully to their heartbreaking stories. Suddenly, a daring idea struck him. To truly understand life's meaning, he needed to experience that harsh reality himself. The next day, he quietly prepared old clothing, an outdated jacket, torn jeans, and a worn-out woolen hat, to disguise his true identity. He left behind his luxurious apartment, expensive smartphone, wallet, and even his business cards, embarking on a life beneath the Brooklyn Bridge as a homeless man. As he stepped outside, a mixture of excitement and fear overcame him. Richard realized that from this moment onward, he was no longer billionaire Richard Montgomery, but simply a man searching for deeper and more genuine truths amidst the complexities of life. The evening shadows lengthened as Richard approached the Brooklyn Bridge, his heart pounding louder with each step. The reality of his decision began to weigh heavily on him as the once familiar cityscape took on a more intimidating and alien appearance. Beneath the bridge, he found scattered groups of people, each seemingly locked in their personal battles against despair. Richard felt deeply out of place, yet knew he had to adapt swiftly. Finding an isolated corner, he spread out a thin, frayed blanket he had brought along. The night fell swiftly, bringing with it an intense chill that seeped through his thin clothing. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter, yet unable to escape the biting cold. Around him, quiet murmurs and occasional coughing filled the silence. For the first time, he realized how vastly different this world was from the luxury he'd always known. Just as Richard began doubting his ability to endure the night, an elderly man approached him, cautiously offering a piece of bread. "You're new here, aren't you?" the old man asked gently. Richard nodded, humbled by the man's kindness despite his obvious poverty. "Yes," he whispered, accepting the bread gratefully. "It gets easier," the man reassured, settling nearby. "We're all just trying to make it through one night at a time." Throughout the night, sleep evaded Richard. Instead, he observed his surroundings, struck by the resilience and quiet dignity of those around him. His discomfort gave way slowly to a deeper sense of empathy and respect for those whose daily lives were a constant struggle. As dawn broke, Richard felt exhausted but strangely enlightened. He had survived his first night beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, yet more importantly, he had begun to understand the hidden depths of human strength and compassion in the most unexpected places. The sun rose weakly over the horizon, casting muted warmth across the bridge's shadowy underside. Richard stretched, every muscle stiff from the harsh night spent on concrete. His stomach growled softly, reminding him sharply of a hunger he'd rarely experienced. As Richard stood, contemplating his next move, a faint rustling caught his attention. Turning, he spotted a small, frail figure rummaging quietly through a nearby trash bin. Richard watched silently, his heart tightening at the sight of the child's thin frame and dirty clothing. "Hey there!" Richard called softly, not wanting to frighten the boy. The child jumped slightly, eyes wide with alarm before settling into cautious curiosity. "I didn't see you there," the boy murmured, clutching tightly to a small loaf of stale bread he'd found. "I didn't mean to scare you," Richard offered gently, his voice softening. I'm new around here. What's your name? The boy hesitated, studying Richard carefully before answering. Oliver, he finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard smiled reassuringly. Nice to meet you, Oliver. I'm Richard. Oliver stepped a little closer, relaxing slightly as he took in Richard's non-threatening demeanor. Are you hungry? Oliver asked, holding out half of the bread. Touched by the child's generosity, Richard accepted the piece gratefully. As they sat together, Oliver began talking quietly, revealing fragments of his short yet difficult life. Richard listened attentively, marveling at the boy's resilience and positivity despite the hardships he'd endured. Oliver spoke of hope and simple joys, a perspective Richard had rarely encountered in his affluent circles. Each word the boy shared felt like a small, precious gift, awakening within Richard a deeper understanding of compassion and humility. By the end of their simple breakfast, Richard knew that this unexpected friendship would profoundly change his journey beneath Brooklyn Bridge. Oliver wasn't just a child he had met by chance. Oliver was a bridge himself, connecting Richard's old world to the reality he sought to understand. Days beneath the Brooklyn Bridge gradually turned into weeks, and Richard found himself slowly adapting to the rhythms of street life. Each moment spent alongside Oliver became a precious lesson, deepening his understanding of humanity's resilience. Oliver introduced Richard to the community under the bridge, each person with a unique story of struggles and dreams. There was Mary, an elderly woman who knitted scarves from scraps to share warmth. Joe, a former school teacher who taught street kids basic reading skills on cardboard scraps. And Laura, who sang quietly every evening, her melodies soothing the community's weary spirits. Richard observed how Oliver shared food, comfort, and humor effortlessly, despite having almost nothing himself. He watched how a single act of kindness could ripple through their small community, igniting warmth in even the coldest nights. One evening, as the city skyline glittered in the distance, Oliver and Richard sat by a small fire built from twigs and discarded paper. Oliver gazed thoughtfully into the flames, his eyes reflecting wisdom beyond his years. You know, Richard, Oliver began quietly, breaking their comfortable silence. I've learned that happiness isn't about having everything. It's about appreciating the small things, like this fire, or having someone to talk to. Richard absorbed Oliver's words, feeling a profound sense of humility. His previous life had been full of lavish excess, yet he had rarely felt true happiness. Here, beneath the bridge, with Oliver's simple truths echoing in his ears, Richard finally understood what he had been missing. Each day became a lesson, reshaping Richard's perspective and priorities. He learned about the courage required to face daily uncertainties, the value of community support, and most importantly, the genuine joy found in simple moments of connection. As the days passed, Richard felt an unspoken shift within himself, a transformative recognition of what truly mattered: kindness, compassion, and the strength to uplift one another through life's harshest storms. One crisp morning, as Richard awoke beneath the familiar shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge, he felt a profound sense of clarity. The transformation within him had become undeniable, marking an awakening that stretched beyond mere empathy into genuine purpose. Richard gazed across at Oliver, still sleeping peacefully, his thin face softened in repose. The boy had unknowingly taught Richard more about life in these few weeks than years of wealth ever had. Oliver's pure-hearted generosity had illuminated the path Richard now knew he had to follow. Later that day, Richard took a quiet walk through the city streets. Observing people bustling through their routines, he recognized his own past life, a pursuit of success without genuine fulfillment. He stopped in front of a high-rise building, staring upwards at the glossy windows that once symbolized his dreams. Now they seemed strangely distant. Returning to the community beneath the bridge, Richard felt resolved. It was time to go back to his old life, but not as the same man who had left it. He wanted to use his resources and influence to change things, to create real impact, driven by the understanding he'd gained during his time on the streets. As he discussed his decision with Oliver that evening, Richard saw a mix of sadness and pride in the boy's eyes. "Will you forget about us?" Oliver asked quietly. Richard gently placed his hand on Oliver's shoulder, his voice firm with conviction. "Never. You've given me a purpose, Oliver. I'll return not just for you, but for everyone here, I promise." With this promise, Richard felt the weight of responsibility, not as a burden, but as a welcome opportunity. His awakening beneath the Brooklyn Bridge had reshaped his identity completely. He had entered as a man searching for meaning, and now he would leave as one ready to act, carrying a newfound mission in his heart. The day Richard chose to return to his old life arrived quietly, a gentle sunrise greeting his determination. As he carefully gathered his few belongings, he felt a powerful blend of excitement and sadness. Saying goodbye, even temporarily, to the community that had welcomed him beneath the bridge felt unexpectedly difficult. Oliver stood beside him, holding back tears but managing a brave smile. "I'll miss you," Oliver whispered, his voice catching slightly. Richard knelt, placing his hands firmly on Oliver's shoulders. "I promise you, Oliver, I will come back. Not just for you, but to help everyone here, trust me." With one last hug, Richard turned away, stepping out of the shadows into the bustling city streets. His return felt surreal. The noise and movement of everyday life seemed foreign after weeks beneath the bridge. Each step closer to his luxurious apartment building deepened his resolve. Back in his apartment, everything appeared unchanged, yet Richard saw everything differently. The extravagant furnishings felt out of place, distant from the raw authenticity he'd recently experienced. Immediately, he began making calls, arranging meetings, and setting into motion a plan fueled by newfound purpose. Within days, Richard initiated significant projects to establish shelters and educational centers across New York, focusing especially on children like Oliver. He used his vast resources and influential contacts to swiftly set wheels turning, driven by clarity and compassion born from genuine understanding. Despite his busy schedule, Richard regularly visited the bridge, reconnecting with Oliver and the others, sharing progress and hope. With every visit, Richard found his spirit rejuvenated, strengthened by the joy and gratitude he saw reflected in their eyes. His journey home had not only been about returning to luxury or power, it had been about returning with a mission, to bridge the profound gap between privilege and hardship, fueled by lessons learned beneath the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge. Months turned into a year, and Richard's vision blossomed into reality. Shelters, community centers, and educational programs sprang up across New York City, offering support, hope, and dignity to those who once felt forgotten. Oliver, now living under Richard's care, flourished with the love, support, and stability he'd longed for. Richard stood proudly beside Oliver during the grand opening of their largest community center. Media and city officials praised his philanthropy, but Richard's focus remained firmly on the small group of familiar faces smiling warmly from the crowd, his friends from beneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Oliver, neatly dressed and standing tall, squeezed Richard's hand gently. "We did it," he said softly, eyes shimmering with joy. Richard smiled warmly, heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it together, Oliver, and will continue doing even more." Over time, Richard's story spread, inspiring others to step forward, fostering deeper community connections and broader acts of generosity. The gap Richard had aimed to bridge between privilege and poverty gradually shrank, replaced by understanding, compassion, and active solidarity. Richard often reflected on the first chilly night he'd spent beneath the bridge, marveling at how profoundly that moment had shaped his path. His transformation had begun not in luxury or wealth, but in the humble warmth of human kindness. Now, every evening, Richard and Oliver shared simple dinners filled with laughter, dreams, and plans for the future. Their bond grew ever stronger, anchored in mutual respect and shared purpose. Richard knew he'd found the genuine wealth he'd long sought, not in bank accounts or material comforts, but in meaningful connections, purpose-driven actions, and an open heart. Life beneath the Brooklyn Bridge had indeed changed Richard forever. But more importantly, it had granted him a new beginning, one rich with purpose, guided by compassion, and forever illuminated by the profound lessons learned in the shadows beneath the bridge.